Stop talking just to fill silence. Stop replying just to win. Stop assuming every conversation is about proving a point. The people who understand life better are not the ones who speak the most. They are the ones who listen deeper, watch carefully, and think before they react. Every extra word can weaken your position. Every rushed response can damage your clarity. Learn this now. The less noise you create, the more truth you can hear. Speak less, understand more. That is how wisdom begins. Chapter 1. Silence is not weakness, it is power. Silence is not weakness. Silence is power. Silence is control. Silence is discipline. Most people do not understand this. They think speaking more means they are stronger. They think filling every gap means they are more intelligent. They think the person who reacts first is the person who wins. That is false. The person who can stay calm has an advantage. The person who can pause has an advantage. The person who does not rush to speak has an advantage. That is the key. Because when you speak too quickly, you reveal too much. When you talk too much, you lose precision. When you answer every attack immediately, you give away your emotional position. And once you give that away, people stop hearing your words and start reading your weakness. You have a choice. You can speak from pressure, or you can speak from power. You can reply to be heard, or you can wait to be understood. You can fill the silence because it makes you uncomfortable, or you can use the silence because it makes you stronger. That's the key. Silence creates space, and space creates observation, and observation creates better decisions. That is why calm people often command more respect, not because they are louder, not because they are more dramatic, not because they are always the smartest in the room. They command respect because they are not desperate for attention. They do not chase every moment. They do not panic when others start talking. They watch, they listen, they measure the room before they move, and that changes everything. In an argument, the person who speaks the loudest is not always the one with the strongest position. Very often, the loudest person is the least controlled. They are trying to force an outcome. They are trying to cover insecurity with volume. But a quiet person who answers slowly, clearly, and without fear can shift the entire energy of the room. Pause first, speak second. That simple rule can save you from countless mistakes. When someone insults you, your first impulse may be to fire back immediately. Do not. That first reaction is usually emotional, not intelligent. It is usually pride, not wisdom. It is usually ego, not strategy. So pause, breathe, let the moment pass through you before you respond. Because once emotion controls your mouth, discipline leaves the room. You don't need their permission to stay calm. You don't need their permission to take your time. You don't need their permission to think before you answer. That's the key. In meetings, silence is often misunderstood for uncertainty. That is another mistake people make. A quiet person is not always confused. A quiet person may simply be listening to what everyone else is missing. While everyone is rushing to sound useful, the disciplined person is collecting information. While everyone is performing, the disciplined person is understanding. And understanding is worth more than performance. Listen carefully. Most people want to speak before they have processed anything. They hear one sentence and immediately take a side. They hear one opinion and immediately take a side. They hear one criticism and become defensive. That is not strength. That is poor control. Silence gives your mind room to work. Silence helps you notice tone. Silence helps you notice hesitation. Silence helps you notice when someone is hiding frustration behind polite words. Silence helps you notice when someone says yes, but their body says no. Silence helps you notice the truth behind the performance. Pause first, speak second. That is how you stop being manipulated by noise. That is how you stop confusing motion with progress. That is how you stop talking yourself into weak decisions. In relationships, too much talking often destroys the very thing you are trying to protect. People over-explain because they are afraid of being misunderstood. They repeat themselves because they are afraid of not being accepted. They keep talking because silence makes them feel exposed. But often, the more you talk, the more you make the problem bigger. Not every feeling needs a speech. Not every tension needs a lecture. Not every silence needs to be broken immediately. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is stop talking and start observing. You have a choice. You can react and create more chaos, or you can pause and create clarity. That's the key. A wise person does not waste words. They understand that words are currency. Spend them carelessly and they lose value. Use them intentionally and they become powerful. This is why calm people often seem more convincing. They do not overwork their point. They do not chase approval. They say what matters, then they stop. That alone is a lesson most people never learn. The world is full of people who talk because they are nervous, talk because they are insecure, talk because they want control, talk because they are afraid of silence. But silence is not the enemy. Silence is the mirror. It shows you who is disciplined and who is scattered. It shows you who can think and who can only react. If you cannot sit in silence, you cannot sit in wisdom. If you cannot pause, you cannot process. If you cannot listen without preparing your answer, you are not truly hearing. That is why this chapter matters. Because the goal is not to become cold. The goal is not to become passive. The goal is not to become disconnected. The goal is to become controlled, calm, precise, clear. It's not about being silent for style. It's about discipline. It's not about acting mysterious. It's about thinking deeply. It's not about staying quiet because you are afraid. It's about staying quiet because you are aware. That's the key. In your daily life, start practicing this immediately. When someone speaks, do not interrupt. Let them finish. When someone challenges you, do not rush to defend yourself. Pause. When someone tries to provoke you, do not give them your emotional reaction for free. Stay still. When you enter a room, do not force your presence with noise. Let your presence speak first. People will notice. They will notice that you are different. They will notice that you are not easy to shake. They will notice that you are not controlled by the moment. And that changes how they deal with you. Because once people realize you do not waste words, they begin to listen more carefully when you do speak. Your silence builds weight. Your pauses build authority. Your restraint builds respect. That is not an accident. That is discipline in action. You have a choice. You can be the person who reacts to everything, or you can be the person who understands before responding. You can be the person who talks to be seen, or you can be the person who listens to see clearly. That's the key. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is information. Silence is power. Silence is the first step towards understanding. And understanding is the foundation of every better decision, every stronger relationship, every sharper outcome. You have mastered the first truth. Now you must learn the next one. If silence is power, then the next question is simple. Why do so many people still talk too much just to feel important?
Chapter 2. Stop talking to impress people. Stop talking to impress people. Stop explaining yourself to sound smart. Stop filling every silence with extra words just to look important. That habit is killing your clarity. It is also killing your respect. Most people do not speak because they have something valuable to say. They speak because they want to be seen. They speak because they want approval. They speak because they want to look intelligent, funny, wise, powerful, or necessary. But the more you try to impress, the more you expose insecurity. That is the truth. You do not need to prove what is already true. You do not need to audition for every room. You do not need to turn every conversation into a performance. That's the key. The person who is secure does not need to win every sentence. The person who is grounded does not need to dominate every discussion. The person who is confident does not need to explain every detail like they are afraid of being misunderstood. They speak with purpose. They stop when the point is made. They let the words do their job. Not more, just enough. And that discipline changes everything. Because when you talk too much, people stop listening. When you ramble, your point weakens. When you overshare, your value drops. When you interrupt, you reveal impatience. When you force jokes, you reveal neediness. When you keep adding unnecessary words, you make yourself harder to trust. You have a choice. You can speak to impress, or you can speak to inform. You can talk to be admired, or you can talk to be understood. You can chase attention, or you can build authority. That's the key. There is a reason some people walk into a room and immediately lose their impact. They open their mouth too fast. They say too much too soon. They start explaining before anyone asked. They start defending before any accusation was made. They start talking because silence feels uncomfortable. And in that discomfort, they surrendered power. Do not do that. Learn to hold your words. Learn to let your presence settle before your mouth starts moving. Learn to think before you speak. A person who speaks with restraint feels heavier in the room. Their words land harder. Their message is cleaner. Their confidence is quieter but stronger. They are not scrambling for approval. They're not begging to be noticed. They're not trying to force a reaction. That is why people trust them more. You do not need their permission to be enough. You do not need their permission to be intelligent. You do not need their permission to be valuable. You do not need to keep talking until everyone agrees with you. That's the key. Look at how people behave when they are desperate to impress. They interrupt. They over-explain. They name-drop. They tell stories that are longer than necessary. They add details nobody requested. They repeat themselves. They stretch one simple idea into a speech because they want to sound impressive instead of clear. That is not strength. That is insecurity wearing a costume, and it is easy to see. A person who talks too much often thinks they are hiding weakness. They are not. They are broadcasting it. Every extra sentence says, "Please validate me." Every unnecessary explanation says, "Please believe me." Every forced attempt to sound brilliant says, "Please notice me." That energy is visible. People feel it. And once they feel it, they pull back. Real confidence does the opposite. Real confidence says the point once. Real confidence lets the silence stand. Real confidence does not panic when nobody claps immediately. Real confidence does not need to be the loudest voice in the room. That is why the discipline of speaking less is so powerful. It removes the performance. It removes the pressure. It removes the need to entertain. And once that need disappears, real understanding begins. You hear more. You notice more. You think more. You respond better. That's the key. In conversations, one of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to control how they are perceived instead of controlling the quality of their communication. They want to sound brilliant, so they stop being clear. They want to sound funny, so they become disruptive. They want to sound knowledgeable, so they talk over people. But the more you try to manage perception, the less you actually connect. Do not chase the image. Chase the truth. Speak so the message is clear. Speak so the other person can understand. Speak so your words serve the conversation, not your ego. You have a choice. You can be the person who talks because they are anxious, or you can be the person who speaks because it matters. You can be the person who keeps adding words to protect their image, or you can be the person who says less and means more. That's the key. In real life, people who overtalk often become exhausting to be around. They drain conversations, they hijack discussions, they make everything about them. They turn simple moments into long explanations, and after a while, people stop inviting them into serious spaces. Why? Because over-talking usually means under-listening, and under-listening means poor understanding. It is not about sounding smart, it is about discipline. It is not about having the most words, it is about having the right words. It is not about being noticed, it is about being trusted. That's the key. If you want to stop talking to impress people, start by catching yourself in the act. Notice when you are speaking only because the room is quiet. Notice when you are explaining something nobody asked you to explain. Notice when you are adding a story because you want the conversation to circle back to you. Notice when you are interrupting because you want to prove you know the answer. That awareness is the beginning of change. Then pause. Then breathe. Then ask yourself one question before you speak. Is this necessary, or is this just noise? That question will save you. It will sharpen your communication. It will protect your energy. It will make your words stronger. You do not need to prove what is already true. You do not need to announce your intelligence. You do not need to perform your worth. Your worth should be visible in your discipline. Your discipline should be visible in your restraint. Your restraint should be visible in the way you speak. That's the key. The moment the need to impress disappears, everything becomes cleaner. You stop chasing reactions. You stop forcing laughter. You stop talking just to avoid silence. You begin to listen with intent. You begin to answer with precision. You begin to communicate like someone who knows exactly who they are. And that changes your entire life. Because people don't remember the person who said the most. They remember the person who made the most sense. They remember the person who spoke at the right time. They remember the person whose words felt deliberate, calm, and real. So make that your standard. Not more noise, more meaning. Not more performance, more clarity. Not more proof, more discipline. You have a choice. You can keep talking to impress people who are not even paying full attention, or you can stop performing and start communicating with power. That's the key. Speak less, mean more, listen better, understand deeper. You have learned how silence gives you control. Now you must learn how listening gives you access to the truth hidden beneath the words.
Chapter 3. Listen for what is not being said. Most people hear words. Very few people actually listen. That is the difference. That is the skill. That is the discipline. Because words are only part of the message. Sometimes they are not even the real message. Sometimes the sentence is a mask. Sometimes the tone is the truth. Sometimes the pause says more than the answer. Sometimes the hesitation tells you everything you need to know. Listen beneath the words. Listen beneath the words. Listen beneath the words. That is the key. If you only hear what people say, you will miss what they mean. If you only focus on the sentence, you will miss the feeling behind it. If you only track the surface, you will stay blind to the deeper reality. And in life, that blindness is expensive. You have a choice. You can listen just to reply, or you can listen to understand. You can hear sound, or you can hear meaning. That's the key. A person who listens deeply does not just hear information. They hear pressure. They hear fear. They hear resentment. They hear uncertainty. They hear confidence. They hear lies hiding inside polite language. They hear what the other person is trying to protect. And that changes everything. Because people rarely tell the full truth directly. Not in family conflict, not at work,
not in negotiation, not in relationships. They speak around the truth. They soften it, they disguise it, they delay it, they omit it. That is why you cannot be lazy with your attention. Listen beneath the words. In family conflict, for example, a person may say, "I am fine," but their voice is tight, their response is short, their eyes avoid contact, their energy is off. That is not fine. That is pressure. That is hurt. That is something being withheld. If you only accept the words, you will miss the emotional reality. You will think the conversation is over when it has only just begun. You will keep talking about the surface while the real issue stays buried underneath. And buried issues do not disappear, they grow. That's the key. At work, this happens all the time. A boss says, "No problem," but the pause before the words was long. The tone was flat. The body language was stiff. The meeting suddenly changed temperature. That means something. It may not mean disaster. It may not mean anger. But it means the message is not only in the sentence. It is in the delivery. It is in the timing. It is in the silence before the response. It is in the shift that happens after the answer. Listen beneath the words. A skilled listener notices when someone answers too quickly. They notice when a person avoids specifics. They notice when details are missing. They notice when a story keeps changing. They notice when the energy does not match the explanation. They notice when someone talks a lot but says very little. That is where the truth lives. Not in the performance, in the gaps. Not in the polished explanation, in the omissions. Not in the loud statement, in the quiet contradiction. You have a choice. You can accept every sentence at face value, or you can study what the sentence is hiding. You can be easy to mislead, or you can become difficult to fool. That's the key. In negotiation, this becomes even more important. People often reveal their position without realizing it. They say they are flexible, but their hesitation says otherwise. They say they are not desperate, but their timing says otherwise. They say the offer is not urgent, but their repeated follow-up says otherwise. Listen beneath the words. You are not just listening for the content, you are listening for the structure of the message. Are they rushing? Are they avoiding? Are they over-explaining? Are they correcting themselves? Are they suddenly vague when specific numbers come up? Are they calm when they should be nervous? Are they nervous when they should be calm? That is intelligence. That is awareness. That is discipline. Most people walk through conversations like they are only there to wait for their turn. That is why they miss so much. They are not listening. They are loading their next sentence. They are not observing. They are preparing to interrupt. They are not understanding. They are defending their own position in advance. Do not be that person. Stay present. Stay still. Stay aware. That's the key. The best listeners do not chase every detail at once. They let the conversation breathe. They let the silence reveal what the words are not saying. They pay attention to the speed of the response. They pay attention to the pause after a question. They pay attention to the difference between what was said and what was avoided. That is where the truth leaks out. A person may say it doesn't matter, but if they keep returning to it, it matters. A person may say, "I'm over it," but if their tone still carries tension, they are not over it. A person may say, "I trust you," but if their body is guarded, the trust is incomplete. Listen beneath the words. Do not be hypnotized by the sentence alone. Do not be fooled by politeness. Do not mistake volume for honesty. Do not mistake confidence for clarity. You have a choice. You can accept every sentence at face value, or you can study what the sentence is hiding. You can be easy to mislead, or you can become difficult to fool. That's the key. In negotiation, this becomes even more important. People often reveal their position without realizing it. They say they are flexible, but their hesitation says otherwise. They say they are not desperate, but their timing says otherwise. They say the offer is not urgent, but their repeated follow-up says otherwise. Listen beneath the words.
You are not just listening for the content, you are listening for the structure of the message. Are they rushing? Are they avoiding? Are they over-explaining? Are they correcting themselves? Are they suddenly vague when specific numbers come up? Are they calm when they should be nervous? Are they nervous when they should be calm? That is intelligence. That is awareness. That is discipline. Most people walk through conversations like they are only there to wait for their turn. That is why they miss so much. They are not listening. They are loading their next sentence. They are not observing. They are preparing to interrupt. They are not understanding. They are defending their own position in advance. Do not be that person. Stay present. Stay still. Stay aware. That's the key. The best listeners do not chase every detail at once. They let the conversation breathe. They let the silence reveal what the words are not saying. They pay attention to the speed of the response. They pay attention to the pause after a question. They pay attention to the difference between what was said and what was avoided. That is where the truth leaks out. A person may say it doesn't matter, but if they keep returning to it, it matters. A person may say, I'm over it, but if their tone still carries tension, they are not over it. A person may say, I trust you, but if their body is guarded, the trust is incomplete. Listen beneath the words. Do not be hypnotized by the sentence alone. Do not be fooled by politeness. Do not mistake volume for honesty. Do not mistake confidence for clarity. You have a choice. You can accept every sentence at face value, or you can study what the sentence is hiding. You can be easy to mislead, or you can become difficult to fool. That's the key. In negotiation, this becomes even more important. People often reveal their position without realizing it. They say they are flexible, but their hesitation says otherwise. They say they are not desperate, but their timing says otherwise. They say the offer is not urgent, but their repeated follow-up says otherwise. Listen beneath the words. You are not just listening for the content, you are listening for the structure of the message. Are they rushing? Are they avoiding? Are they over-explaining? Are they correcting themselves? Are they suddenly vague when specific numbers come up? Are they calm when they should be nervous? Are they nervous when they should be calm? That is intelligence. That is awareness. That is discipline. Most people walk through conversations like they are only there to wait for their turn. That is why they miss so much. They are not listening. They are loading their next sentence. They are not observing. They are preparing to interrupt. They are not understanding. They are defending their own position in advance. Do not be that person. Stay present. Stay still. Stay aware. That's the key. The best listeners do not chase every detail at once. They let the conversation breathe. They let the silence reveal what the words are not saying. They pay attention to the speed of the response. They pay attention to the pause after a question. They pay attention to the difference between what was said and what was avoided. That is where the truth leaks out. A person may say it doesn't matter, but if they keep returning to it, it matters. A person may say, I'm over it, but if their tone still carries tension, they are not over it. A person may say, I trust you, but if their body is guarded, the trust is incomplete. Listen beneath the words. Do not be hypnotized by the sentence alone. Do not be fooled by politeness. Do not mistake volume for honesty. Do not mistake confidence for clarity. You have a choice. You can accept every sentence at face value, or you can study what the sentence is hiding. You can be easy to mislead, or you can become difficult to fool.
Chapter 4. Your first reaction is usually your weakest one. That is the truth. That is the warning. That is the discipline. Most people do not fail because they lack intelligence. They fail because they move too fast. They hear something sharp and they answer too quickly. They feel embarrassed and they defend too soon. They get challenged and they react instead of thinking. And in that moment, they give away control. Do not answer fast. Answer well. Do not answer fast. Answer well. Do not answer fast.
answer well. That is the key. Because the first thing that comes out of your mouth is often not your wisdom. It is your emotion. It is your pride. It is your fear. It is your need to protect yourself before you have even understood the full situation. And that kind of reaction creates regret. You have a choice. You can react immediately and make the moment worse, or you can pause and make the moment useful. You can defend your ego, or you can protect your peace. That's the key. Look at what happens in real life. Someone says something rude and you snap back. Someone questions you and you rush to prove yourself. Someone accuses you and you start explaining too early. Someone interrupts you and you become aggressive. Someone criticizes you and you try to escape the discomfort by talking faster. That is not strength. That is emotional leakage. That is weakness wearing speed. And speed is dangerous when your mind is not settled. A fast reaction feels powerful in the moment. It feels like control. It feels like confidence. But it is often the opposite. It is a sign that the moment has entered your nervous system before it has entered your thinking. And once that happens, your words become tools of panic instead of tools of clarity. Do not answer fast. Answer well. That means you do not rush to be understood before you have understood the situation yourself. That means you do not speak just because the room is quiet. That means you do not let your emotions grab the steering wheel. That's the key. A delayed response is often a smarter response. Why? Because delay creates space. Space creates reflection. Reflection creates better language. Better language creates better outcomes. When someone challenges you, your mind needs a second to separate truth from threat. When someone criticizes you, your mind needs a second to separate useful correction from unnecessary insult. When someone provokes you, your mind needs a second to separate the content from the emotion. That second matters. You have a choice. You can let the moment control you, or you can control the moment by slowing down. That's the key. This is why impulsive people keep creating the same problems. They speak before thinking. They reply before listening. They protect themselves before understanding. And because of that, they say things they do not mean. They escalate situations that could have stayed calm. They turn small tension into big conflict. Then later, they regret it. Then later, they explain themselves. Then later, they wish they had waited. But wisdom does not live in regret. Wisdom lives in restraint. Do not answer fast, answer well. In a family argument, this matters deeply. A parent says something harsh, a sibling throws a comment, a partner speaks with frustration. The immature response is to fire back instantly. The disciplined response is to pause and let the first wave pass, because the first wave is usually emotional. The second wave is usually more truthful, and if you can stay grounded long enough, you can respond to the real issue instead of the emotional noise. That is how conflict gets resolved, not by shouting the loudest, not by speaking first, not by winning the moment, by answering well. At work, this discipline becomes even more important. A manager questions your decision, a colleague pushes back, a client complains, a supervisor corrects you. If you react too quickly, you sound defensive. If you rush to explain, you sound uncertain. If you answer from emotion, you reduce your authority. So pause. Take the question in. Let your mind work. Then answer with precision. That's the key. A thoughtful response carries more weight than a fast one. A measured response creates trust. A calm response shows maturity. A clear response ends confusion. Most people think intelligence is about having the quickest answer. That is not true. Often, intelligence is about knowing when not to answer immediately. It is about recognizing the cost of speed. It is about understanding that silence is not always absence. Sometimes silence is preparation. You do not need to answer every question the instant it arrives. You do not need to defend every impression. You do not need to prove your point while your emotions are still loud. You have a choice. You can let speak from pressure, or you can speak from perspective. You can react from the wound, or you can respond from wisdom. That's the key. Think about how many people talk themselves into trouble because they cannot tolerate a little discomfort. A comment lands wrong and they jump. A tone feels disrespectful and they snap. A misunderstanding appears and they panic. They think the fastest way out is to talk more, but often the fastest way out is to talk less and think more. Do not answer fast, answer well. That phrase is not just advice, it is a weapon against chaos. It is a shield against embarrassment. It is a guard against unnecessary damage. Because once words leave your mouth, you cannot pull them back. Once the reaction is out, the damage has begun. Once you respond from emotion, you create work for your future self. And your future self will have to clean up what your impulsive self created. That is not discipline. That is disorder. The disciplined person does something different. They create a small gap between stimulus and response. They let the body settle. They let the mind catch up. They ask one simple question. What is the best response, not the fastest response? That question changes everything. It changes your tone. It changes your timing. It changes your outcomes. It changes the respect people have for you. Because people notice when you're not easy to provoke. They notice when you do not rush to defend yourself. They notice when you can pause under pressure. That calm becomes your advantage. That's the key. And the more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. At first, pausing feels awkward. At first, not answering immediately may feel like weakness. At first, silence may make you uncomfortable. Good. That discomfort is part of the training. That discomfort is where your control is being built. Stay there. Do not run from it. Do not fill it with noise. Do not let your nerves choose your words. You have a choice. You can let the first reaction represent you, or you can let a wiser response represent you. That's the key. And here's the deeper truth. Your first reaction often reveals your unresolved habits. If you react with anger, maybe anger has been trained into you. If you react with fear, maybe fear is driving too much of your life. If you react with defensiveness, maybe your self-image is too fragile. If you react with sarcasm, maybe you're protecting vulnerability with performance. That is why delay is powerful. Delay interrupts habit. Delay exposes pattern. Delay gives you a chance to choose differently. That's the discipline. Not about being slow for the sake of being slow, not about pretending to be detached, not about acting above everything. It is about control. It is about choosing your response instead of being dragged by your reaction. Do not answer fast, answer well. That is how you stop creating unnecessary conflict. That is how you stop sounding smaller than you are. That is how you stop giving away your power to the first emotion that enters the room. The person who masters this becomes harder to shake, harder to manipulate, and harder to misunderstand, because their words are not spilled out of panic. Their words are selected with care. You have learned how silence gives you power. You have learned how listening gives you understanding. Now you must learn how restraint gives you intelligence under pressure.
Chapter 5. Ask better questions, get better truth. Stop trying to sound impressive. Start trying to understand. That is the shift. That is the discipline. That is the key. Because the person who asks better questions will always learn more than the person who talks too much.
The person who keeps performing loses the room. The person who keeps questioning opens the room. And once the room opens, truth starts coming out. Ask to understand, not to perform. Ask to understand, not to perform. Ask to understand, not to perform. That is the standard. Most people ask questions for the wrong reason. They ask to show intelligence. They ask to sound sharp. They ask to keep attention on themselves. They ask a question, then immediately turn it into a speech. That is not curiosity. That is performance with a question mark on the end. Do not do that. You have a choice. You can ask to look smart, or you can ask to reveal the truth. You can speak to fill the space, or you can question to open the space. That's the key. A strong question is often more powerful than a long explanation. One clean question can expose confusion. One simple question can uncover honesty. One direct question can break through fear, resistance, or distraction. Long speeches often hide the real issue. Sharp questions force the issue into the light. That is why powerful listeners do not dominate conversations. They guide them. They lead with precision. They lead with restraint. They lead by asking what matters most. In an interview, for example, the person who talks too much usually weakens their position. They over-explain their experience. They tell unnecessary stories. They ramble because they want to prove their value. But the person who listens carefully and asks smart questions changes the atmosphere. They learn what the role really requires. They learn what the interviewer cares about. They learn what problem is actually being solved. That is intelligence. That is discipline. That is power. Ask to understand, not to perform. In friendships, this matters too. Many friendships stay shallow because people only trade opinions. They never ask anything deeper. They never ask what the other person is really going through. They never ask what changed. They never ask what is missing. They never ask what the silence means. So they stay on the surface and call it connection. That is not understanding. That is noise. A better question changes that. How are you really doing? What has been weighing on you lately? What are you not saying? What do you need right now? Those are not decorative questions. Those are opening questions. They make room for honesty. They give the other person permission to speak from the deeper place. And that is where the real conversation begins. You have a choice. You can keep conversations shallow, or you can ask in a way that invites truth. That's the key. In relationships, people often fail because they talk at each other instead of asking each other anything meaningful. They assume, they accuse, they defend, they perform. They explain their own pain, but never ask where the other person is hurting. They want to be understood, but they do not create a space where understanding can happen. That is where good questions matter. Not aggressive questions, not manipulative questions, not questions used to corner people. Questions used to clarify. Questions used to uncover. Questions used to understand. For example, instead of saying, "Why are you always like this?" you ask, "What is making this feel so heavy for you?" Instead of saying, "You never listen," you ask, "What part of this is not landing with you?" Instead of assuming, you probe. Instead of attacking, you invite. Instead of performing your frustration, you search for the real cause. That is strength. That is maturity. That's the key. At work, this skill separates average communicators from effective leaders. The average communicator talks too much in meetings. They explain, repeat, and overstate. The effective leader asks the question that everyone else avoided. They ask, what is the actual problem here? They ask, what outcome are we trying to produce? They ask, what are we missing? They ask, what is stopping this from moving forward? Those questions clear confusion. Those questions expose weakness. Those questions create direction. People trust the person who can cut through noise with one sharp question. Why? Because it shows they are not lost in themselves. It shows they are not trying to steal the room. It shows they are not performing intelligence. They are using intelligence. There's a difference. Ask to understand, not to perform. That sentence should guide your entire communication style. If your question is really about your image, stop. If your question is really about sounding clever, stop. If your question is really about filling silence, stop. You do not need their permission to ask something useful. You do not need their permission to slow the conversation down. You do not need their permission to go beneath the surface. That's the key. The wrong question closes people. The right question opens them. The wrong question pushes for an answer. The right question creates one. That is why powerful listeners are so effective. They are not passive. They are not weak. They are not silent because they have nothing to say. They are strategic. They know that one well-placed question can tell them more than a 10-minute speech. Think about the difference. A careless speaker fills the room with opinions. A disciplined listener fills the room with clarity. A careless speaker tries to control the conversation. A disciplined questioner controls the direction. That's the key. And here's what most people miss. A good question also reveals the questioner. It shows whether you are careless or thoughtful. It shows whether you are curious or self-centered. It shows whether you are paying attention or just waiting to talk. So before you ask, check your motive. Are you asking because you want the truth or because you want the spotlight? Are you asking to learn or to look informed? Are you asking to connect or to control? You have a choice. You can use questions as decorations, or you can use questions as tools. That's the key. The best questions are simple, clear, direct, unforced. They don't try too hard. They don't contain 3 hidden messages. They don't sound rehearsed. They go straight to the heart of the matter. And because they are clean, they get clean answers. People often reveal more when they feel safe, understood, and unthreatened. That means your question should lower the guard, not raise it. It should invite thought, not panic. It should open the door, not slam it. That is how you get better truth, not by talking more, not by forcing answers, not by dominating the room, by asking better questions. Ask to understand, not to perform. Ask to understand, not to perform. Ask to understand, not to perform. That repetition matters, because this is where real communication begins. The moment you stop performing and start questioning with purpose, your conversations become deeper, your listening becomes sharper, your influence becomes quieter but stronger. People begin to trust your presence because they feel your attention. That is power. That is how you lead without shouting. That is how you guide without controlling. That is how you get more truth with less noise. You have learned how silence protects your power. You have learned how listening reveals what words hide. You have learned how reaction can ruin your judgment. Now learn how the right question can open a person faster than 1,000 opinions.
Chapter 6. The more you explain, the less they believe you. That is the rule. That is the warning. That is the discipline. Because when your words multiply too much, your certainty starts to look weak. When you keep adding details nobody asked for, your message starts to sound unstable. When you defend yourself too hard, people begin to wonder what you are hiding. And when you speak too long, you often destroy the very trust you are trying to build. Say it once, mean it fully. Say it once, mean it fully. Say it once, mean it fully. That is the key. Most people think explanation creates clarity. Sometimes it does, but too much explanation creates clutter. Too many words create suspicion. Too many sentences create confusion. And too many excuses create the impression that you are unsure, guilty, or trying too hard to control how others see you. You have a choice. You can speak to clarify, or you can speak to cover yourself. You can be direct, or you can become tangled. That's the key. In life, people trust what feels clean. They trust what feels settled. They trust what feels deliberate. But when you start over-explaining, your words begin to sound like anxiety. They begin to sound like panic. They begin to sound like you are trying to talk your way out of a consequence instead of standing inside your own position. That does not build respect. That weakens it. Look at excuses at work. A person makes a mistake, and instead of saying, "I missed the deadline, I am correcting it now," they launch into a long story. They explain the traffic, they explain the emails, they explain the pressure, they explain the distraction, they explain everything except the actual issue. And by the end, the listener is no longer focused on the mistake. They are focused on the weakness behind the explanation. That's the key. A clear person does not need 10 sentences to say what happened. A disciplined person does not panic when accountability shows up. A strong person can admit the truth without turning it into a performance. They say what happened, they own it, they correct it, then they move. That is trust, not verbal clutter, not defense, not noise. Say it once, mean it fully. In relationships, over-explaining becomes even more damaging. One person feels hurt, and instead of speaking clearly, they keep circling the issue. They say too much. They repeat themselves. They try to make sure every angle is covered. They want to be fully understood, but in the process, they often become exhausting. Their pain gets buried under words. Their message gets lost in emotional overflow. That is not communication. That is flooding. And flooding does not create understanding, it creates distance. If something is wrong, say it plainly. If you are hurt, say it clearly. If you need change, ask for it directly. If you are disappointed, do not disguise it inside a speech. That's the key. Because emotional over-explaining often comes from fear. Fear of being dismissed, fear of being blamed, fear of being misunderstood, fear of not being taken seriously. So the person keeps talking, they keep adding, they keep justifying, they keep expanding the explanation because they think more words will make their pain more valid. But pain does not become more valid because it becomes longer. Truth does not become stronger because it becomes louder. Clarity is what strengthens it. You do not need their permission to speak plainly. You do not need their permission to stop over-defending yourself. You do not need their permission to let your words stand on their own. That's the key. In conflict, this matters even more. Two people are arguing, and one starts explaining every little detail, every past event, every emotion, every reason. Suddenly, the real issue disappears. The argument becomes a storm of side points. Nobody knows what the actual problem is anymore. The room gets heavier, the tension gets worse, and the original message is lost. Do not let that happen. Do not turn every disagreement into a court case. Do not act like every moment needs a full defense. Do not confuse explanation with strength. Say it once, mean it fully. If you were wrong, admit it. If you were right, state it simply. If you need to leave the conversation, say so. If you need space, say so. If you need clarity, ask for it directly. Do not hide behind long explanations when a clean sentence would do. That is not discipline. That is fear pretending to be logic.
You have a choice. You can speak in circles, or you can speak with precision. You can sound busy, or you can sound certain. You can protect your image with extra words, or you can protect your credibility with honest, short communication. That's the key. The more secure you become, the less you feel the need to explain yourself to everyone. That does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean refusing to communicate. It means refusing to waste words. It means trusting that truth does not need decoration. It means understanding that clear speech is stronger than emotional clutter. People who are grounded know how to say more with less. They know how to answer directly. They know how to make one clean point. They know how to stop when the message is complete. That is why they are believed. That is why they are respected. That is why they do not look desperate for approval. In everyday life, start watching your own language. Notice when you explain too much because you are nervous. Notice when you keep talking because you want to be liked. Notice when you're building a case no one asked for. Notice when your answer becomes longer because your confidence is weaker. Catch it, stop it, replace it with clarity. A simple answer is often a stronger answer. A short admission is often a more honest admission. A clean boundary is often more powerful than a long explanation. That's the key. If someone asks why you made a decision, do not turn it into a speech unless the situation truly requires it. Give the reason, give the point, give the truth, then stop. Let it land. Let it breathe. Let your words carry weight because they are not buried under excess. Say it once, mean it fully. That phrase will save you in meetings. It will save you in arguments. It will save you in interviews. It will save you in relationships. It will save you from sounding uncertain when you should sound clear. It will save you from sounding guilty when you should simply sound accountable. It will save you from sounding weak when you should sound grounded. And here is the deeper lesson. When you stop over-explaining, you stop trying to control every reaction. You stop trying to manage every emotion in the room. You stop trying to convince people of what should already be obvious. You begin to trust your own clarity. You begin to speak from strength instead of fear. That is transformation. Not more words, better words. Not longer answers, clearer answers. Not verbal clutter, intentional speech. You have a choice. You can keep trying to explain yourself into being understood, or you can become the kind of person whose clarity speaks before the sentence is even finished. That's the key. Clarity builds trust. Clutter destroys it. Clarity creates respect. Clutter creates doubt. Clarity lands your words. Clutter makes your words drift. So cut the excess. Cut the excuses. Cut the overthinking in your speech. Cut the pressure to justify every move. Say it once, mean it fully. That is how you stop sounding uncertain. That is how you stop weakening your own position. That is how you start carrying real authority without raising your voice. You have learned how silence gives you power. You have learned how listening gives you understanding. You have learned how reaction can damage your judgment. You have learned how questions can uncover truth. Now learn how clean speech builds trust faster than endless explanation ever will.
Chapter 7. Control the room by controlling your mouth. Control the room by controlling your mouth. That is the discipline. That is the difference. That is the key. Most people think influence comes from volume. They think authority comes from talking more, interrupting more, explaining more, and forcing more words into the room. That is a mistake. Loudness is not power. Loudness is often panic. Loudness is often insecurity dressed up as confidence. But real power is not loud. Real power is precise. Less noise, more control. Less noise, more control. Less noise, more control. That is the standard. Because the person who controls their mouth controls the pace of the room. They control the energy. They control the tension. They control how much of themselves they reveal and how much they keep in reserve. And that reserve is not weakness. That reserve is command. You have a choice.
You can fill the room with unnecessary speech, or you can shape the room with deliberate words. You can speak to be noticed, or you can speak to be followed. That's the key. In meetings, people often confuse contribution with quantity. They speak 3 times when once would do. They repeat a point that was already clear. They talk just to prove they are engaged. They interrupt because silence makes them nervous. But the person who speaks less and speaks well often carries more weight. Their words land because they are not diluted. Their presence is stronger because it is not scattered. Say less, mean more. That is how authority grows. A disciplined speaker does not rush to dominate every discussion. They listen first, they observe, they wait for the right moment. Then they speak with purpose, not to impress, not to compete, not to flood the room, to move the conversation forward. And when people realize your words are intentional, they start listening more carefully. That's the key. In interviews, this becomes obvious very fast. The candidate who talks too much often sounds anxious. They overanswer, they wander, they ramble, they keep adding stories because they want to be liked. But the candidate who speaks cleanly, calmly, and directly feels more prepared, more confident, more trustworthy. Their answers do not chase attention. Their answers carry direction. Less noise, more control. You do not need 10 sentences to prove competence. You do not need a long story to prove value. You do not need to fill every pause to prove confidence. You need clarity. You need discipline. You need timing. That's the key. In social groups, this same rule separates the people who are taken seriously from the people who are tolerated. The person who speaks constantly often becomes background noise. They become predictable. They become easy to ignore. But the person who speaks with precision becomes harder to dismiss because their words are not cheap. Their words are chosen. Their words have weight. That does not mean becoming cold. That does not mean becoming robotic. That does not mean refusing to engage. It means refusing to waste your influence. You have a choice. You can spend your words like they mean nothing, or you can use them like they matter. You can talk to fill space, or you can shape space. That's the key. In difficult conversations, this discipline becomes even more powerful. When emotions rise, people often start shouting, defending, repeating, and over-explaining. They think the person who speaks first wins. They think the person who speaks loudest wins. But what usually happens is this: the louder the mouth, the weaker the message. Do not fall into that trap. Stay still, stay clear, stay measured. Less noise, more control. When somebody attacks you, do not explode. When somebody challenges you, do not scatter. When somebody presses you, do not give them chaos. Give them structure. Give them calm. Give them a sentence that cuts through the noise and stops the spiral. That is dominance without aggression. That is authority without theater. That is strength without desperation. That's the key. Because real power is not about forcing people down. It is about keeping yourself above the chaos. It is about not losing your center when others lose theirs. It is about choosing the right word instead of flooding the room with the wrong ones. That kind of control is rare. That kind of control is respected, and people feel it immediately. They feel it when you do not interrupt. They feel it when you do not overreact. They feel it when you do not beg to be heard. They feel it when your voice stays level while theirs rises. They feel it when your words come out clean. You do not need their permission to be composed. You do not need their permission to slow the room down. You do not need their permission to carry yourself like someone who is not ruled by impulse. That's the key. Think about leaders. The best leaders do not always say the most. They say what matters. They end confusion. They reduce noise. They create direction. They speak in a way that makes people more focused, not more scattered. Why? Because they understand that authority is not built by volume. It is built by control. And your mouth is part of that control. If your mouth is impulsive, your presence becomes unstable. If your mouth is careless, your influence becomes weak. If your mouth is always moving, your mind often has no room to breathe. So train it, slow it down, filter it, use it intentionally. You have a choice. You can speak from habit, or you can speak from discipline. You can sound busy, or you can sound certain. You can make the room louder, or you can make the room respect you. That's the key. Less noise does not mean less power. Less noise often means more power, because now your words are not competing with your own excess. They are not buried under filler. They are not lost inside emotional static. They are direct. They are sharp. They are clean. And clean communication changes everything. In negotiation, this is priceless. The person who talks too much reveals too much. They reveal pressure. They reveal urgency. They reveal insecurity. But the person who speaks sparingly creates space. They keep their position clear. They avoid emotional leakage. They control what the other side can read. That is power. Not manipulation, control. That is why the calm negotiator often wins more ground than the loud one, because they are not trying to dominate the room. They are dominating themselves. And once you dominate yourself, you stop being easy to push around. Less noise, more control. In friendship, this also matters. Not every moment needs your commentary. Not every opinion needs to be announced. Not every silence needs to be filled. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is listen, watch, and respond only when your words will add value. That habit makes people take you seriously. It makes them trust your presence. It makes your speech feel deliberate instead of needy. That's the key. The room responds to your discipline. The room reacts to your tone. The room adjusts to your energy. If your mouth is scattered, the room feels scattered. If your words are measured, the room settles. If your speech is noisy, your influence weakens. If your speech is precise, your authority grows. You have a choice. You can speak like you're trying to survive the moment, or you can speak like you own yourself. That's the key. And here's the deeper lesson. Controlling your mouth is not about suppression. It is about selection. It is about choosing what deserves to leave your lips. It is about understanding that every sentence either adds value or adds noise. Every word either sharpens your position or weakens it. Every response either raises your authority or lowers it. So choose carefully. Say what matters. Drop what doesn't. Keep what is clean. Remove what is emotional clutter. Less noise, more control. That is how you move through meetings with confidence. That is how you move through interviews with power. That is how you move through social spaces without begging for attention. That is how you move through conflict without losing yourself. Real power is not loud. Real power is precise. You have learned how silence gives you power. You have learned how listening gives you understanding. You have learned how reaction can ruin your judgment. You have learned how clarity builds trust. Now learn how disciplined speech turns presence into influence.
Chapter 8. Learn the difference between responding and reacting. Learn the difference between responding and reacting, because they are not the same. They are not close. They are not interchangeable. They are two completely different forces. Reacting comes from pressure. Responding comes from awareness. Reacting comes from the wound. Responding comes from control. Reacting is fast, messy, emotional, and expensive. Responding is slow enough to be useful, calm enough to be clear, and disciplined enough to be trusted. Breathe first, then speak. Breathe first, then speak. Breathe first, then speak. That is the key. Most people think they're communicating when they are really just releasing pressure. They feel something sharp and they fire back. They hear criticism and they defend themselves. They get surprised and they blurt out the first thing that comes to mind. That is not communication. That is a nervous system trying to protect itself before the mind has had time to work. You have a choice. You can let pressure speak for you, or you can let awareness speak for you. You can react like a machine, or you can respond like a disciplined human being. That's the key. A reaction is almost always about speed. A response is almost always about accuracy. A reaction wants relief right now. A response wants the best outcome. And those are not the same thing. What feels good in the moment can ruin the moment. What feels strong in the moment can make you look weak later. That is why so many arguments get worse so quickly. One comment, one tone, one misunderstanding, one sudden question, and then everything explodes because somebody could not hold their nerve long enough to think. Do not be that person. Breathe first, then speak. In arguments, this discipline matters immediately. Someone says something rude, and your ego wants to strike back. Someone accuses you, and your pride wants to correct the entire room. Someone misreads you, and your fear wants to explain everything at once. But if you react in that state, you are not solving the issue. You are feeding it. A better move is simple. Pause. Feel the urge. Let it pass through. Then answer from your center, not from your wound. That's the key. At work, a rushed reaction can damage your reputation in seconds. A manager criticizes your work, and you respond defensively. A colleague challenges your idea, and you snap. A client asks an unexpected question, and you panic into over-explaining. Suddenly, the issue is no longer the issue. Now people are distracted by your emotional response. That is costly. You do not need to prove your humanity by losing control. You do not need to prove your strength by reacting hard. You do not need to answer every pressure point with immediate force. Breathe first, then speak. Because breathing is not just physical. Breathing is a reset. It slows the body. It gives the mind a gap. It creates space between what happened and what you choose to do next. And in that space, wisdom can enter. That's the key. A person who responds well understands that not every moment deserves a full emotional output. Not every insult deserves a full defense. Not every surprise deserves a full panic. Some moments need patience. Some moments need silence. Some moments need one clear sentence, not 10 emotional ones. You have a choice. You can let the moment drag you, or you can stand still long enough to choose. You can say the first thing that comes up, or you can say the right thing after thinking. That's the key. Think about unexpected questions. Someone asks you something out of nowhere. Your mind scrambles. Your body tightens. Your mouth wants to fill the gap. So you rush. You answer too quickly. You make the answer bigger than it needs to be. You lose accuracy because you wanted to escape discomfort. Do not do that. A brief pause does not make you weak. A brief pause makes you careful. A brief pause makes you look thoughtful. A brief pause gives your words shape. Breathe first, then speak. In personal relationships, this is one of the biggest tests of maturity. Someone you care about says something that lands wrong. Your immediate feeling is hurt. Then pride enters. Then anger enters. Then you start speaking from the hurt instead of from the truth. You say things to win the moment. You say things to punish. You say things to protect yourself. And once that starts, the conversation stops being about understanding. It becomes about survival. That is not how good relationships are built. A response is different. A response says, I heard you and I need a moment. A response says, that bothered me, but I want to answer well. A response says, let me think before I speak. That kind of language protects both people. It protects the conversation. It keeps the issue from becoming a battlefield. That's the key. Reacting is often a sign that a person has not trained their inner world. They are ruled by pressure. They are ruled by surprise. They are ruled by the need to escape discomfort. But when you train yourself to breathe first, you begin to build inner authority. You begin to choose instead of collapse. You begin to guide your own mind instead of letting your emotions drag it around. And that changes your life.
because once you can pause under pressure, you become harder to manipulate, harder to bait, harder to rush, harder to throw off balance. Less noise, more control. That rule still applies here. The more emotional the situation, the more valuable the pause. The more intense the pressure, the more important the breath. The urgent the moment feels, the more you need discipline. That is how you stop making permanent decisions out of temporary emotion. That is how you stop saying things you will regret. That is how you stop escalating problems that could have been handled with one calm sentence. You have a choice. You can be driven by the first feeling, or you can be governed by the best response. That's the key. A responsive person does not pretend emotions don't exist. They do not deny anger. They do not deny hurt. They do not deny surprise. They simply refuse to let emotion become the boss of the conversation. They acknowledge the feeling, then direct it. They feel the pressure, then manage it. They experience the moment, then shape the outcome. That is emotional discipline. Breathe first, then speak. If you want to practice this, start small. Before replying to a difficult message, take one full breath. Before answering a challenge, let 1 second pass. Before defending yourself, ask whether this is the right moment or just the loudest moment. Before responding to criticism, separate your ego from the information. Not every correction is an attack. Not every question is disrespect. Not every silence requires a fast answer. That awareness will save you. It will save your relationships. It will save your reputation. It will save your peace. It will save you from becoming a slave to your first impulse. That's the key. People who react live in constant cleanup mode. They explain themselves later. They apologize later. They regret later. They fix later. But people who respond well create fewer fires to put out. They move with intention. They choose words that fit the moment. They let clarity lead instead of panic. That makes them dependable. That makes them respected. That makes them calm under pressure. And calm under pressure is one of the rarest forms of strength. Breathe first, then speak. Say that until it becomes automatic. Say it until your body understands it. Say it until your mind obeys it. Say it until your mouth no longer outruns your wisdom. Because the goal is not to become emotionless. The goal is to become disciplined enough that your emotions no longer control your communication. You can feel deeply and still respond wisely. You can be offended and still stay composed. You can be surprised and still think clearly. That is mastery. That is the difference. That is the power. You have learned how silence gives you control. You have learned how listening gives you understanding. You have learned how questions uncover truth. You have learned how clear speech builds trust. You have learned how precise language creates authority. Now learn how emotional discipline protects all of it.
Chapter 9. Read people before you try to be read. That is the discipline. That is the advantage. That is the key. Because most conflict does not begin with what was said. It begins with what was missed. Most misunderstandings do not begin with words. They begin with poor observation. Most bad decisions do not begin with lack of effort. They begin with lack of awareness. And if you cannot read people, you will keep walking into situations blind. Watch first, speak after. Watch first, speak after. Watch first, speak after. That is how understanding begins. Most people want to be understood first. They want to explain themselves first. They want to be seen clearly first. But if you are always trying to be read before you learn how to read others, you will stay stuck in shallow communication. You will talk past people. You will misjudge their intent. You will miss the tension before it becomes a problem. That is costly. You have a choice. You can focus on being understood, or you can focus on understanding first. You can center yourself, or you can study the room. That's the key.
Reading people is not guesswork. It is observation. It is pattern recognition. It is paying attention to what repeats, what changes, and what does not match. People reveal themselves all the time, in their tone, in their posture, in their timing, in the speed of their replies, in the words they avoid, in the way they behave when they think nobody is watching. Watch first, speak after. A person may say they are fine, but their face says otherwise. A person may say they agree, but their body is closed off. A person may say yes, but the hesitation before the word tells another story. A person may say they are not upset, but their energy is heavy. If you only hear the sentence, you miss the signal. If you only chase the answer, you miss the pattern. That's the key. In family life, this skill can prevent unnecessary pain. A sibling becomes quieter than usual. A parent stops asking questions. A partner replies with less warmth. A friend suddenly changes routine. If you are not paying attention, you will only notice when the conflict explodes. But if you are watching carefully, you can sense the shift early. You can ask better questions. You can approach with care. You can avoid turning a small wound into a bigger one. That is intelligence. That is discipline. That is social awareness. At work, this becomes even more valuable. A team member says they are on track, but their behavior suggests stress. A manager says the project is fine, but the tone says pressure. A client says they are satisfied, but the silence tells you they are not convinced. If you know how to read people, you catch these things early. You respond before the issue grows. You do not wait for the breakdown to reveal what observation could have told you sooner. Watch first, speak after. That rule will save you from many avoidable mistakes. People often think social intelligence is about charisma. It is not. Charisma can impress. Observation protects. Charisma can entertain. Awareness can guide. Charisma can make you likable. Awareness can make you wise. And wisdom is what keeps you from repeating the same conflict with different faces. You have a choice. You can walk into every room trying to be impressive, or you can walk into every room trying to understand what is really happening. That's the key. The person who reads people well sees what most others miss. They notice when the energy drops after a certain topic. They notice when someone laughs too hard at a serious question. They notice when a person avoids eye contact only with one individual. They notice when a meeting changes tone after one comment. They notice when someone is present physically but absent emotionally. That is not paranoia. That is attention. And attention creates advantage. Because once you understand what is happening beneath the surface, you stop reacting blindly. You stop trusting every word equally. You stop assuming every face means what it shows. You begin to see the difference between the message and the mask. That alone can change your decisions. Watch first, speak after. In conversations, people often reveal their real position without saying it directly. They repeat certain phrases. They avoid certain details. They shift topics when the truth gets close. They become louder when they are losing emotional control. They become vague when specifics matter most. They become defensive when exposed. If you are paying attention, you will see the pattern. And once you see the pattern, you do not need to force the truth. It starts showing itself. That is why the best listeners are not just quiet. They are alert. They are patient. They are mentally present. They are not waiting to perform. They are gathering information. They are listening to the spoken words, yes, but also to the unspoken ones. They are reading the room before they try to lead it. That's the key. A person with strong awareness does not jump into every space with an opinion. They scan first. They feel the mood. They observe the tension. They notice who is dominating, who is withdrawing, who is pretending, who is uncertain. Then they speak. And when they speak, their words fit the moment. That is powerful. because speaking too soon often means speaking without context, and when you speak without context, you risk sounding careless, ignorant, or tone-deaf. But when you read the room first, you know whether to challenge, comfort, wait, or withdraw. That is maturity. That is discipline. That is control. You do not need their permission to observe. You do not need their permission to be thoughtful. You do not need their permission to study the pattern before making a move. That's the key. Read people and you reduce conflict. Read people and you increase accuracy. Read people and you stop taking every word at face value. Read people and you become harder to manipulate. Read people and you begin making wiser decisions with less noise. This is especially important because many people are not saying what they feel directly. They are filtering, they are managing, they are protecting themselves. They are hoping you will not notice the shift in mood, the mismatch in tone, the hidden frustration, the quiet resistance. But you should notice, not to become suspicious, not to become cold, to become wise. Watch first, speak after. You will save yourself from entering arguments that were never real. You will save yourself from trusting signals that were never stable. You will save yourself from wasting words on people who were already closed. You will save yourself from forcing explanations where observation could have been enough. That's the key. And here's the deeper lesson. Understanding people starts with humility. It starts with accepting that your first impression may be incomplete. It starts with admitting that your assumptions can be wrong. It starts with pausing long enough to let behavior tell its story. If you are too eager to be heard, you will miss what others are showing you. So slow down. Watch the patterns. Notice the repetition. Notice the delay. Notice the shift. Notice the contradiction. Notice the silence. That is where the truth lives. You have a choice. You can keep trying to be understood by people you have not learned to understand, or you can master the discipline of paying attention first. That's the key. Because when you understand people, you argue less. When you understand people, you guess less. When you understand people, you react less. When you understand people, you choose better. Watch first, speak after. That is not passivity. That is intelligence. That is not suspicion. That is awareness. That is not distance. That is discipline. You have learned how silence gives you control. You have learned how listening gives you understanding. You have learned how reaction can damage your judgment. You have learned how questions can uncover truth. You have learned how clean speech builds trust. You have learned how emotional discipline protects your mind. Now learn how reading people before speaking gives you the final advantage.
Chapter 10. Master the Quiet Life and Win More Easily. Master the quiet life. Not the empty life, not the passive life, the disciplined life, the aware life, the controlled life. Because the truth is simple. A quieter person with a sharper mind will always move further than a loud person with scattered thoughts. Speak less, understand more, win quietly. Speak less, understand more, win quietly. Speak less, understand more, win quietly. That is the principle. That is the system. That is the key. Everything you have learned leads here. Silence, listening, restraint, observation, control. These are not separate skills. They are one discipline, and that discipline is what gives you an advantage in a world full of noise. Because most people are loud but unclear. Most people are reactive but unaware. Most people are expressive but undisciplined, and that is why they struggle. You have a choice. You can join the noise, or you can master the quiet. You can move with chaos, or you can move with control. That's the key. The quiet life is not about speaking less just for appearance. It is about thinking more before speaking. It is about choosing words instead of spilling them. It is about understanding situations before reacting to them.
It is about being grounded enough that you do not need constant expression to feel secure. That is strength. Not silence for show, silence for clarity. In personal growth, this becomes obvious over time. The person who talks about everything they will do often does less. The person who announces every plan often struggles to execute. The person who keeps seeking validation often loses direction. But the person who works quietly, observes carefully, and moves deliberately builds momentum without distraction. That is how progress happens, not by constant expression, by consistent discipline. Speak less, understand more, win quietly. In leadership, this principle becomes powerful. The loud leader often creates confusion. Too many words, too many reactions, too many emotional shifts. The team does not know what to follow. But the quiet leader who speaks with precision creates stability. Their words are clear, their timing is controlled, their presence is steady. People know where they stand. That builds trust. That builds direction. That builds results. That's the key. In conflict resolution, the quiet approach wins more often than the loud one. The person who shouts may feel strong in the moment, but they often lose clarity. They escalate the issue. They damage the relationship. They create more problems than they solve. But the person who stays calm, listens deeply, and responds carefully often diffuses the tension. They keep the focus on the issue, not the emotion. That is real control. That is real power. That is real maturity. Speak less, understand more, win quietly. That phrase is not just a strategy, it is a mindset. It is a way of living. It is a standard for how you carry yourself in every environment. Whether you are in a meeting, a relationship, a negotiation, or a moment of pressure, the rule stays the same. Speak less, understand more, win quietly. That is how you avoid unnecessary conflict. That is how you protect your energy. That is how you build trust. That is how you make better decisions. That is how you move through life with clarity instead of confusion. And here's the deeper truth. Mastery is not loud. Mastery does not need to announce itself. Mastery does not need constant validation. Mastery is controlled. Mastery is measured. Mastery is deeply aware. That's the key. When you master this, people begin to feel your presence before you speak. They notice your calm. They notice your timing. They notice your restraint. They notice that you are not like everyone else who is rushing to be heard. And because of that, when you do speak, your words matter more. That is influence, not forced, earned. You have learned how silence gives you power. You have learned how listening reveals truth. You have learned how reaction weakens you. You have learned how questions uncover depth. You have learned how clarity builds trust. You have learned how control creates authority. You have learned how awareness sharpens your judgment. Now you bring it all together. Speak less, understand more, win quietly. Carry that into every conversation. Carry that into every decision. Carry that into every moment of pressure. You have a choice. You can go back to noise, or you can move forward with discipline. That's the key. Because in the end, the person who understands more will always outperform the person who speaks more. The person who controls themselves will always outlast the person who reacts to everything. The person who moves quietly often arrives further than the one who announces every step. So choose your path carefully. Choose discipline over noise. Choose awareness over reaction. Choose clarity over clutter. Speak less, understand more, win quietly. That is how you win. Now take this with you. Every unnecessary word drains your power. Every careless reply weakens your position. And every moment of silence can sharpen your understanding. Speak less, listen more, watch more, think more. Not because the world needs quieter people, but because the world needs wiser people. The loudest voice in the room is not always the most intelligent voice in the room. The fastest answer is not always the right answer. The person who understands more will always move better, decide better, and live better. So from this moment, stop rushing to respond. Stop filling every gap. Stop trying to sound impressive. Become the person who sees more than they say and understands more than they announce. If this message hit deep, like the video and subscribe to Mindshift Audiobooks for more powerful transformation.